So two scenarios, and first of them is called discourse or conversation, and towards playing it out, we can use this Jamboard, the multiple pages of it, whatever approach we use, as a kind of simulation. Like it might have, the kind of conversation might have other possibilities, but this can at least form a medium of playing some of the areas of it. But the key thing is like almost like a setup for this is, like, imagine a situation like this. Like, let's say some amount of people, 2, 3, 4, maybe us, has sat down on a table, maybe in a cafe, maybe somewhere else. And what would conventionally happen is a conversation in the wider spectrum. Now, the question put on top of that is how that conversation could be different, expanded, if cards and their play become present. And I'll make some anecdotal examples just to point this out, like, and use these examples that I put in. Let's say that in somewhere at the start of the conversation, somebody puts out maybe just the word time. Maybe they have some way of showing this image, but it's not really necessary. But they kind of put it on a table in a kind of card-like fashion. And that's all. While it's a card, it's also like a frame that can be filled further. They might, for example, slightly later introduce the move called cut into that card, maybe write it down there. And that then introduces this possibility of making a cut, which might be defined as, like, I'll cut a moment of our conversation and we can repeat it, maybe with variations. And it becomes a possibility, precisely expanding this conversation itself. But that's just an anecdotal example of what could happen from many, many possibilities. Like, why pick this scenario, even though it's wide, but I think the scenario could emphasize or highlight the sort of qualities of how the cards could behave like concepts of words, and how like culturally one could come to reflect this sort of wideness of this sort of possibilities. Like, isn't there like almost like an underlying thought is one can imagine a different different culture of conversation. Now, that culture might first exist in the form of let's play a game. It's like, this is how we converse because we are in this game where we have this possibility of cards. But that is already a cultural proposal that might become a convention and therefore become a different form of conversation in itself. But it can start out as this sort of games. And of course, it's a reflection of our conversation here. So we can use this conversation to simulate this. Of course, now we don't have a table cafe. We have this virtual table. That's one possibility to simulate it. But this can also like contemplate situations like what happens when one is walking around and having a conversation, other forms, etc. But as a direction, I think Linda just dropped in technical difficulties, but I think she's coming back. But yes, so any thoughts, questions, comments on this kind of a direction framing of a scenario?
Sounds good. I like it. What do you envision for a starting point?
I think precisely this sort of playing of cards in any manner, like taking this idea of a card and kind of solidifying, concretizing it in some moves. For example, like in my case, the like this sort of playing of time. I intentionally played something super simple, like just the idea of time, to kind of underline that I don't have to know more at this point to play a card. Of course, I could play something else. I'll point out another, which is so in this right top corner, there is this image which has a caption, image of a movie which has a caption, what is this? And that's a card that I called Escaping from the Witch House, which is, by the way, what is happening in that movie. I'll actually write it down. And for me, it became this card of that has the idea that like imagine this scenario. It like two people have escaped from the witch house and got lost into a forest. And in the witch house, the thing that the witch ate is people's memories, like the memories of these two people. That is, the what is this text is kind of a reminder of that. Is like you have forgotten not everything, but some parts. And therefore it has this move of, let's call it selective forgetting, is that you decide to forget something. And with that card being played, there comes this possibility of, let's say, taking part in a conversation, listening to some comment or making some comment with selective forgetting. I decide I forget this part of my memories. So that's a more complex case, I guess, but another example that came to my mind. But I kind of like open the boards which are positively being filled already, and also making new boards, which everybody can do. As ways, like, for example, like if I now having played that time, it's like it being on the table, whether it's concretely on the table or not, it's kind of like if one thinks of normal process of conversation, it's like something being installed or hanging up above the conversation itself, like possibility that somebody maybe never utilizes or decides to take upon in a certain moment, or decides to use that like a holder, is like you add to it, like, oh, somebody played time, I add the move cut to it, and the card grows. And then the card becomes possibility, which can be discussed of how the card move is being played. Like, for example, somebody could ask, can you cut back to when you said this? Can we play that moment again? And suddenly the conversation is functioning differently.
I would like that as we do this, we would make the cards. I don't know what's the best way, maybe a sticky note or something, maybe just a square with text, but that the cards, yeah, that the cards are created and stay there, and we can like fork them and copy them and whatever, but that they get written down.
Yeah. Yes, that's kind of the idea, and that's also what the kind of flexibility, as far as it goes, of this platform offers, is to people making the cards, however shittily or draftily, as they go along. And also, like, if they're doing in another frame of these boards, they can invite people to them, like come to 3, for example. So that's kind of a setup. I have a third example, but I'm talked long enough. I can possibly leave it later unless you want to hear it.
I saw in your example move that there was both like a mining, an anomaly mining going on in the frame of the movie, and then like a card making moment, and then the potential of using that move. So I'm wondering.
Do say.
No, I'm wondering if the farming of ideas is part of the move.
Yeah, I mean, can be. Like, this is precisely to be explored. Is like, like, which kind of directions seem fruitful? There is, like, yes, once again, an infinity of directions, but at least some of them will seem fruitful. Like, for example, you could play the anomaly mining. Like, in a way, like, the card can behave like a seed, that it can always grow. New things can be added to it, or but new things can also be cut from it. Like, you add anomaly mining of its own card as its own card, but then maybe you even place it near this if you want to, and that's another meaning again. Yeah, actually, that arc.
You repaste the link there for Linda?
Oh yes,
or
yeah.
Thank you.
Let me just get to meeting controls. There.
Thank you.
Actually, whoever is drawing the arrows of the kind of I thought of this 3 cards as a triptych or a series or an arc, and I didn't make it like an exact meaning for it, but like the idea I had was like the first is almost like in front of knowledge, like this complexity of the facade, and kind of possibility of entering it, which is something that we actually played on this card, sort of. But then the second part could be like in the midst of knowledge, which could also be thought lost in the midst of knowledge, which can combine with the lost in the woods potentially, which is this, because that picture was framed partly this sort of looking up, almost like wandering around inside inside the knowledge that one saw outside in the first card. And then the third one, I don't know, I think it was just interesting, this sort of light, and like I had this idea of like an action moment change in the midst of knowledge, like, because there is like shadows of another human. Some part of knowledge is in light, but other parts are in darkness. But this was a question mark for me. So, but it was this idea of playing, like, if you play this different structurings, which there can be many, but like you can propose this as a triptych, for example.
I drew the line sign. I love the triptych idea. I guess this is a time move. It's like a cut proposal in some way or another. It's of course open to interpretation, but there's a possible navigation path among those arrows. which will have consequences depending on the color. I should say
Yes.
that.
You could even
Not trivial, not trivial.
And they have non-trivial consequences.
Yeah,
It's
I can
facts.
draw,
just be aware.
I can draw this line here, connecting these two.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, clearly we're getting at a difference between the colors of the lines. So like these links, the links between moments themselves have an aesthetic quality, you know, that can be interpreted. The shape, the style of the line.
Mhm.
See, this is for sure a different meaning than that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, I add a move to time, which is, let's call it drawing time. And let's make it smaller because.
Ooh, drawing time. I like that.
So in a way, like what actually already fleshes this out is what we just had a conversation of. Is like, in a way, like this drawing time move could feed itself from what we just talked about, and also like from Pablo's original move of adding the lines, which is kind of an example of drawing time. So I could now spend time to write those, to flesh out what the drawing time move is, which could be one way. Probably won't take time for that now, but just as an example, that in a way what you did turns into an operation act, which then gathers together not just the operation you did, but everything we talked about it, and then it's kind of like crystallized or put in a linchpin that can be returned to by the move drawing time, which is then potentially inside the time card or a card of its own.
I love the drawing time idea. It's so powerful.
And here is an interesting quality that I think is already happening, which is this is kind of structuring this as putting things like on the ground, quote unquote, or table or any spacing. But then what you're putting there is these points of growth, that this seems to be naturally happening. Like in a way, like there was a sort of a growth in the idea of playing with time in this manner, which actually kind of was born in a crossbreed of the time card and your actions, Pablo. So they crossbred. But then that crossbred entered into the time card as drawing time. So all of these things are kind of more like looking at like a space of a garden where things are growing, rather than just having a stream like a normal conversation is, like supporting the structuring that is more growth. And of course, this introduces another perspective, which was something I was thinking as an important possibility, which is roughly saving, but can be taught very widely, is like maybe like Pablo, as you said, you like the idea of drawing time. Maybe you take it from here, you retain it after the conversation, and it's a card you hold. And what that concretely means can mean many, many things, because it doesn't have to be formed concretely as a picture or anything, but you're kind of treating it like a card. It's like a card in your deck or in your hand even. It's like you're carrying in your hand the drawing of time when you walk away from the conversation. And this is kind of now, I think, starting to touch on how this can behave like words and concepts, but operate and organize differently.
Yes, I would very often find myself in need of drawing some time to clear out some time movements, daily time movements.
Are these also examples of drawing time, there's also dividing time, and styling the operations on threads, which is an interesting growth on the drawing time and weaving time. And another interesting point here is like, when we grow a concept, we put like, oh, the concept means this and also means that. But then the card form, because somebody could just take a snapshot of this, what's happening, it's more flexible in terms of being able to contain and being able to contain in different forms. So something is drawn, something is put in words, some other form. So like all of this could grow into the drawing time and then become this way to hold, say, not just the meaning, but the operation of that. But it has like more flexibility because the card form is more flexible in terms of how it contains things and also how it relates to things. I talk too much, so I'm trying to get anybody else to talk, especially these additions, or anything else.
These there's like so one of the things I'm experimenting with here is I think we're seeing how the lines themselves, their style, can itself be an icon and can express some way of networking.
Yes.
So here, like, I was trying to go into like weaving operations, right? What is this this spiral, and then a division, there's a division cutting through, who knows? There's like a certain style to it. This could be interpreted in the form of a dance. It could be a way in which we process with our bodies the way in which we will divide our time amongst different activities, right? Feeling corporally what we really want to be attributing our time to. Weaving operations, right? Like, what does it mean for one line to never really connect with the slide of drawing time, but to play with the line of dividing time? So it's like, the blue line never really touches the clock in the middle, or like this infinity clock that's being divided, but it is still playing, it is still weaving and entering into contact with the line itself, which I feel can be expanded on.
Yeah, I really like the styles as a navigation tool, or as stylistically navigating concepts. Really opens up like I don't know, like a very evident modularity of filters, I guess, of perspectives through style.
Yeah, and it's important. I think it's important to note that what can be an icon, what can be a style, is more than what is just represented in this plane, right? Like, there is a style to how we dance. There's a style to like gestures. So like styles are themselves properly like n-dimensional. Like they're and anything can be a icon.
Couple of directions to highlight here. First is like from the beginnings of your comment, Leo, is it created this like a connected thought of creatures of lines and a bestiary of lines, like taking the framework of a creature book, but about lines in the sense of how they look, but like really starting from their behavior, them being kind of active entities in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And what would be a bestiary of lines? And that's uh, interesting possibility. I had another. Now I'm kind of forgetting it, but it'll come back to me. But that's one addition to that.
Thinking about spiders weaving webs of strings, right?
Yeah, yeah. And then you can even start from like imagining this like a bestiary of lines. Maybe you have like the spider family.
Mm-hmm.
It's still about lines
Ooh.
and how they behave, but the spider family of behaviors. And then secondly,
This was crazy. Yeah, that collaboration there.
yeah, we just totally jumped in on that together there.
Yeah.
yeah, yes. And now I remember the second, which is what you said about styles. I put it as suite of styles. I put the suite itself in quotation marks.
Soup.
Suit like a card suit.
Ah,
Yeah. So in a way, like to organize, playfully organize styles, there are many ways. Like one could even, like this suit is really just an example. Like you could essentially, to make a suite of styles could be like you collect examples or cases of styles, and then as they grow, they form a suit called styles, just like there is a suite of cards. But of course, it could take other forms of organization. Suites is just an example. You could also make, I don't know, like a house of style.
Soups of styles.
Yes, and even a house of style, which is this, going back to this sort of worldly, is like you actually kind of imagine it as a house and you start to add the styles as rooms, and then you think of what the furniture is. And you're kind of working just on a different organization, but in this kind of system, you're free to pick whatever organizing principle you pick, which are essentially infinite.
Mm-hmm. A stylistic universe.
Yes, yeah.
Or universe of styles.
Yeah.
I was actually today in the morning thinking about how much of how we navigate ideology and community and belonging relates to styles, as in like the music you listen and then you dress a certain way, and then people like vibe with you, and you can recognize someone in the street for their style and be like, yeah, we're vibing just because of a sense of style, how they speak, how they move, and how we use style as really a bridge to intuition to navigate those complex world of symbolic meaning, right?
So as a kind of experiment, I'll go to the third board, and then imagine a situation. Now you just mentioned styles and belonging. There were other words, but let's put the belonging there. I like these are now played almost on a board, like, and now the board has like two cards on different corners.
I would love that this would be a website. Just arrive at a website and this is what you see.
Yeah, and then I'll put in a spirit of experimentality. Let's put in the lower part. I'll put a move, and I'll call it crossbreed.
Ooh, a classic.
Yeah. So now this board to play offers or proposes like styles and belonging, and then move of crossbreeds between them. And one doesn't have to follow that, but just to kind of illustrate how that then becomes, call it like a processing constellation which is
Mhm.
like could form once again in infinite forms. But then that kind of creates a focus. Now there is like a focus of like maybe intensively or focusedly like crossbreeding between styles and belonging, which then starts
Mhm.
to potentially grow on this board. And then crossbreed is one kind of suggested move, which is like, I mean, we had multiple things on crossbreed as um, from earlier play, and one doesn't of course have to follow this, but you know, crossbreed as metamorphosis, that you start from two sides and start to figure out things in the middle in the spectrum, or crossbreed of taking aspects from each, like a particular style and particular form of belonging, and trying to mix them and things like this. So that's just material operative practices that could be introduced there. And I had no do say.
I'm crossbreeding at this moment. The star is one edge of this spectrum, and I'm gonna bring another edge of this spectrum.
I will actually.
Wow, those are amazing. What are those symbols?
Just alien symbols.
No way.
Yeah.
Alien from where? They look very precise. Alien.
I literally just looked up alien symbols.
Ah, okay. Because I was like, wow, this alien have fish.
Oh, wrong picture. Delete. Oh, because I picked it from the. I should have picked this one.
Wow, this is great. This slide is looking dope.
And I'll put this in the belonging as a play. This is not necessarily crossbreeding, even though it kind of is. I should move it maybe a little bit from the belonging, but it's in the belonging end. So the text, the subtitle says conspirator. And as you see, the person, if one needs it, is approaching a church alone, which is a form of belonging, but also a style of belonging, giving this term conspirator.
Oh, you guys see this?
The arrow, yeah, but
yes,
then it disappears.
Yeah, it's the laser pointer.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
No way. Okay. Yeah. Wow. That's great, actually.
It's like a temporary. It's like a line, an ephemeral line.
Yeah, it's
with an ephemeral style.
Yeah, and it's a style of line now, like the temporariness of a line. And you can even like, okay, I'll add this to the first.
We can dance together with our lines, man.
Yeah, like I'll add it somewhere here. Like this creates for me an idea, which I add to near the bestiary of lines, which is actually time, of course, but let's put it temporality, probably, and then persistence.
Yeah.
So
the temporality of lines, yeah.
Yeah, like when we think of creatures, we have like a huge culture of different forms of time, temporality, and persistence, which is like, oh, this creature lives for 50 years, this creature lives only a day, or this creature lives like this for 3 days, then changes to this. Like, think of this sort of lines and styles of lines, then having a quality of temporality.
Yeah, that's so good. I recently, not so recently, but I watched a video explaining how, like, yeah, the perception of time of different animals, depending on, of course, their size, their heartbeat rate, and capacity to process signals from the outside. And of course, like the fact that the lives of a lot of very short lives in our perspective are fully processed as long lives by other beings, right?
Yeah.
It's a style of time, style of existence. So
But
it's great to think the lines can do that as well, right?
yeah, if line is a creature, how does it see the time? How do we see its time, and how does it see the time itself?
It's like I'm thinking about like the question of like how does a photon view like the universe, you know? But here it's like how does well, that's the thing, is the thread. So then there's, if the thread, no, okay, so I think we can say this. If the thread has a style and it is not a purely like mathematical relation, then is it also a card?
It can be. That's always the answer. It can be. Like everything can be a card. Like even the mathematical relation can take the form of a card or frame of a card.
Yeah.
That's the best thing about cards.
Yeah.
Everything can be a card.
And this is the quality of how they can kind of approach this like parallel structural position in the architecture of meaning to words, like that they that like it's more about like how does that then organizes the possibilities or opens the possibilities around that. Like what if you make the card out of the algorithm or in a different manner? Well, that opens up like what's in the card. There could be different things, there could be moves, but then also how is this card placed alongside other cards?
Because you should go to the dance party.
There's a dance party happening.
Is it which page?
The third. Or are people jumping pages? That's insane. I've been just in the third.
I've been going in the circle.
I made some additions to the first one, mostly to remember some of that. Oh, then now I see the dance party. Okay, so this is the temporality of lines. Dance called temporality of lines. So I could make a suite of dance. I could make a card of dance. But in a suite of dance, there could be a temporality of lines, which could be a video of this, or
this second page is the dance.
Oh yeah.
Oh, holy shit.
Oh yeah. I love this line, whatever it is, because it's almost like it could be a symbol of what it means to make connections through maybe the cross breeders, because it's like you make connections, but then then you change them, and then this connection might not make sense after a while, and you create new ones. So there's a temporality link to making connections, and that's what is a bit it's doing this, that you connect things, but actually it's nothing, like it's not set in stones. There's something quite hysterical as well about this feature. You cannot stop making links in life, I guess. You work by association, so you cannot stop making links, but actually lots of them are also just how we are, but it doesn't make much sense. I don't know if I'm explaining myself well.
No, you are. Like actually that idea, like from another one direction of growth from what you just said is I thought about this sort of once again, this sort of creatures of lines, and then like connections as thought of as like when we think of creatures, we think about their social life, their interactions with others of their kind or different kind, and how then connections could become, when lines are creatures, there's the social or engagement or interactions of these creatures, which can be many. Like they could have an interaction of hunting or capturing, which is like a connection in a maybe even a traditional sense, but you could have other which I'll add here, because like this, like thinking of lines, but then thinking of connections as one behavior of them isn't like an interesting possibility.
I'm thinking about representation. Over here, one of the things I'm trying to explore in this n-dimensional aesthetic manifesto is like this concept of like, how can we represent like the dimensionality of how we are interacting, and so thinking about like when we have dynamic systems, right? We're dancing together, right? We're dancing together. What, like, can we represent the movement like in n dimensions? And like, I really think mathematics is like is just meant for that, you know, as like as a representation of, you can just go so far with it. It's like, and can we play with the mathematical representation of our systems in order to like understand more how, I don't know, it's going far out, but like that's kind of the direction I'm thinking with this dancing thing.
And that could be, that opens up a direction, like the direction behaves like a branch. It can form its own potential infinity. You can develop that, and then you can give form to that, and that becomes like ways to remember, not just remember, but operate through it. But then somebody can pick also another branch and develop it there.
Yeah. We're playing into the expanse, you know. So like, there's so many. I think every way in which we can conceive of the n-dimensional like space in which we are exploring itself a style, which is a frame, which limits and also opens up how we look at this thing. Like math can limit us in certain ways, and I'll open up other ways of like looking at how we can apply operations and stuff that we might not even notice if we were only looking at it through the lens of color, you know, or the lens of squiggles.
And I'll coin up a word from what you said. Like, we could think of it, rather than n-dimensional, we could think of it as semio-dimensional, meaning that every capturing of meaning in whatever form, but some form like semio, can form a dimension. So it's not just a number, even an infinite number of dimensions. Of course, it forms that, but the semio-dimensional is like any capturation point is potentially a dimension.
Yeah, absolutely. I like the emphasis you put on the semio there.
Yeah.
Because it's like, it really, because it's like that is actually, that's totally true. That's where like the n-dimensional thing is pointing towards. By putting emphasis on the semio thing, you're like really hammering in the point that like everything, every sign, every movement, every enregistered icon is a dimension, you know. Then like, how do they interact, and like what? So I think you're really that I think semio-dimensional drives the point home. Yeah, I think that's something we should keep in mind.
I think it's a one good capturing point, which which really kind of puts this sort of like, yes, think of them as infinite, but think of the behavior from the semio, from the behavior of semio, because that really gives you this sort of sense of what's the behavior and how does the infinity behave.
Yeah, and then I guess like that brings us into the question of like the semiosis of like, what does what does the semiosis of semio-dimensional space, what are the ways and shapes that it can take form?
I think we're exploring that precisely.
What are its styles?
Yeah. Like, of course, there are other ways of exploring it, but we're exploring it in a rather flexible manner compared to the conventional ways.
What are the conventional ways of exploring the styles of semi-dimensional operations? I don't know.
I mean, yes, one could visit that question, like, but it's also like, do say, Leo. I'm talking.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking, like, if we're talking, I love that comment, Pablo. But if we're talking, like, semiosis of the semio-dimensional, right?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about the free play of signs, and Peirce's free play of signs here.
Yeah.
And if we are signifying beings, like, right, we're signifying beings or symbolizing beings, then through the free play of signs and the enregistering of them, no, I don't know, but there's something here,
Yeah, there is actually, like, if one takes the Peirce's free play of signs, but then you take the normal problem of, like, introducing people is, like, you can play anything, you can do anything, and nothing happens. Then you can think of games that are located in the free play of signs. Games in the sense of multiple or even infinity, which are then forming structures that guide, like, navigate, but in 3 different directions. And in a way, like, even kind of games, game is a kind of limiting word here, but we're kind of, because we have certain rules or certain, at least rule-like behaviors, we can do this and that allows us to play with navigation in the free play of signs, which is what we're currently doing.
That's absolutely facts. Absolutely facts. Metaphor, right? We're thinking, like, there was a thing that Jakob pointed out, like, back in Austria, which was just awesome, and it was called Clean Questions. I don't know if you ever talked to you guys about that. He's trying to.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, clean language. It has an unfortunate name, but
it's
clean
an unfortunate
speak,
name, but
clean
I find
talk.
it, like, really cool. As, like, a navigational tool for metaphoric interpretation.
Yeah.
Like,
I wonder, I've, like, sometimes thought if there's any science fiction book or story where there's a depiction of a spoken programming language. That it has, like, the strictness of a programming language, but it's spoken. Do you know about a thing like that?
Not precisely. You have this vague memory that there's something towards the direction of that. I can mention as an anecdote that for roughly 2 years in my latter parts in Reality Research Center, one of my projects was called Culture Coding, which was precisely this kind of direction of, like, what kind of other structures. And of course, it's like some of the remnants of that are kind of influential in, like, why to pursue these kind of directions. That, because, like, that it's a very interesting direction in itself. I think further, it's like, in a way, the programming forms one paradigm. It's ultimately important to open it to that it's conventional paradigms. Yes, it's useful to bring programming paradigms, but it's also useful to see that those don't exhaust the space, that there are other paradigms, which is kind of what we're currently doing. And it's actually the creation of these paradigms and structures which kind of expands your navigation in that space. And programming is certainly one of them, but there would be many.
Yeah. There is like one, so like in terms of like languages, yeah, like I agree, no languages can exhaust or whatever there is no like meta language that allows us to express the everything that each individual language can explore. But there are attempts to make like purely like semiosis based robotics where there isn't a program and there isn't a language, but it is the robots operate through the free play of science. And so like, yeah, there's some Japanese robotics researchers who are exploring that. It's fascinating, and I've kind of been diving into that recently for to understand like how human agent robot collaboration might work through play. And yeah, the robots aren't programmed, like they don't create any association between sign and signified. So they just randomly it's yeah.
I'm sure they
Pure
make great
robotics.
jokes.
Yeah.
To take a bridge from here as a proposal, we don't have to walk that bridge, but just as an example. The other scenario that I thought was essentially kind of looking at these possibilities from the angle of let's call it kind of practical saving. So like imagine a scenario of that there's all these platforms, roughly speaking, which are of course platforms like there is Twitter, there is web pages, there's wiki, like put any of them in, but also think of like writing as a platform and document as a platform. And then like if one imagines that after playing, you're walking away or you're coming to your home and you want to save, roughly speaking, some of the plays. And you're in a situation that you want to share it and you start somewhere, a document or make a message, whatever it is that happens, that you take one form that you add it, but now you add it like to the distribution, to the network, to the others to see. But you can still add it in the seed-like form like they were here. Like, for example, how the sort of creatures of lines or lines in general could be added. And of course, there's no right answer there, but then it becomes an interesting way because you can play that saving, archiving, recording, imprinting in different ways, and then produce a similarly growing point, but now it can grow in the network. Somebody else adds to it, and this is also what I mean by the platforms taken as challenges, like not in a negative sense, but in this like, how does it present itself here and how does it present itself here? Like every platform actually kind of pushes it to be different.
This forking of time or fragmentation of time and the potential of it opening new timelines, I guess, or new multiverses, or however we want to call them. It's like it's so present, for example, in video games. I wonder how present it is in other games, because there's genres who have like a quick save function because you are supposed to go back, like try something, go back, try something, go back. Then there's also, you can just do it because you died and you want to restart from a previous save or stuff like that. Or you want to explore one consequence without having to fully commit to it and things of that nature. So I guess it's adding that capacity, and I guess the reason it happens so often in digital media is because of the capacity to copy paste, which is much more difficult in spoken language, I think. But we've previously pointed towards these more stylistic saves, as in with this chess example of instead of saving the position of the pieces, you save the sense of doom. Like, I think I'm losing, I think you're winning. Let's just recreate a board where we both feel the same way. So I guess now it's dawning on me that is like a stylistic approach to time in a way, or through a time capsule of sorts.
Yeah, and it's also like to your point of like, is it in other games the saving? I think that this branching of time and forking of time is probably richest in forms in digital games, partly because it has been responding to practical needs, but nothing prevents bringing it to other forms of play. It actually could exist. It just hasn't been conventionally approached. Like, you could make a role-playing game saving point, and you could make it in the style you just mentioned, that we don't save everything, we save like the sense of doom, or maybe we save the sense of doom plus 2 pieces where they are, and that's the save, like whatever the combination is, like so playing with that and utilizing that is completely possible. It just hasn't been utilized.
Yeah, I mean, very, very often when I explain the potential of XORG, I don't think I do it now because I've like expanded my notions. But in the past, I would say like, yeah, explore games and organizations. Like, imagine if you added a save function to your meetings, and you could go back and have the meeting from a point and then like see what happens there and stuff like that. And that really, it's really powerful for people to think just of that thing, just of opening up a boring meeting and adding save functionality to it. And yeah, so I guess it's part of it.
Yeah, like in the words of the current game that we are playing, or the current play, you could say, when you start from the connections between games and organizations, it ultimately leads you to the creative organization of semiosis, because that's what an organization is. It's organizing how do we interpret, how do we see a certain meaning. But that's
we are approaching the only game that we've identified. There's only one game.
Yeah.
Which is the creation of playing language into existence.
Yeah, and creative. I put the word organization, doesn't necessarily mean the word creative, but organization of semiosis, because it also kind of casts the organization in the creative light that it has always been, like underneath, like how do we use it? Is like, because if we say, oh, we use in this semiosis these words and then we put them in strings, well, that's organization. It's also a game. Like, it's saying rules are, we use these words and then we put them in a string and it's called text, and then you play this text by reading the words in sequence. That's a game. Like without any kind of super question mark, we could think of it as a game. But it's also organization of semiosis. But then that opens up, well, that's one way.
Yo, guys, check out the second page.
All right, coming there.
So that top right corner there, I'm thinking about like, well, we've got like the expanse, right? Then, and we already have contours, and then we're adding styles to them. You know, so like adding signification on top of a pre-existing structure. Yeah, I don't know. So like that, like, I'm just kind of pointing at like the ability that we could have to recolor things, right? To, I don't know, paint on top of. Yeah, that's just one thing. Thoughts? I don't know.
Yeah. Actually, like, since I have talked, do you, Pablo, have any thoughts?
I'm thinking a lot of how these machine learning algorithms, the diffusion-based machine learning algorithms can sum up styles through yeah, you know, like navigating a latent space of visual meaning in between the trained dataset and like, yeah, its abstractions, and how you need to have this compressed space that you traverse for this operation to take place. You meet at a certain position in this multi-dimensional space
Literal
where
choke.
styles are crossing, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that.
Yo, the manifesto that that I want to invite you guys to write into as well. Please do. Once I send out this link, please. But it's called Navigation Through the N-Dimensional Expanse. And like it's about like sensible orientation markers, sign designs. How do you orient yourself and while you're navigating? And like how does one self-conceive the one who is navigating, right? What is it that is navigating? Is it a human? How do I conceive of like myself, you know, as a human being? Is it like as a local thing, or do I conceive of my subjectivity as already networked? How do I perceive it as networked? How do I perceive myself as a what is my notion of the human, you know, in relation to this, and how does that change the ways in which I will navigate? Like, if my notion of humanity is one in which I am not a networked subjectivity, then I'm going to interact with my like environment on the assumption that, like, you know, as an atomistic individual who might see, like, you know, you can think about ecological relations, you know, and then how does a networked subjectivity navigate differently? What kinds of things can we put forward as orientation markers that can help people navigate? And I don't know. Yeah, that's kind of just a general direction.
I
do say.
Yeah, it's just a fast comment that I've while using AI tools, it has become really apparent to me that as they seep into every tool we use, that this notion of navigating space becomes fundamental, right? Like,
absolutely, I think it's the most fundamental concept.
Yeah, whereas before there was a lot of I don't know, create an image through craft, like, which is more of like a skeuomorphic way of production. As our tools become semantically enhanced, a lot of that work would happen through navigating these spaces. That's why I feel like prompting images feels so much like a search engine. You're just navigating that space. You're not really making it.
Yeah, and you can also utilize the perspective of what the navigation is an organizing principle. Like starting from the algorithm itself, what it does is how it organizes all the material that it gets. That's actually the very heart of it. It's like, this is how it organizes. In
this the very algorithm, you said?
What, sorry?
You said algorithm?
Yes, like what the so-called AI is. Like it's an algorithm that formulates an organizing principle. Like, this is what I do to material. This is where I put it. This is how I filter it. This is like, in this wider sense, it is organizing. But then, like, your navigation is also like an organizing principle. Or if you flip the switch, it's a wide way to play. It's like, this is how my game rules. And this also relates to what Leo was saying a moment ago in this, like, atomistic individual versus how does a network societal.
Network subjectivity.
Yeah, network subjectivity, and how does it behave? Like in a way, like you could imagine in the kind of expression space of this, or what we are touching upon, is like you could also represent like, I have a move of atomistic perspective. Here I have a move of network individual, but that actually can be a suite or a style with many styles, because there can be many network forms of network and ways of organizing the network. You usually pick some because they are fertile for what you're processing, but like the others exist as well, the ones that have been imagined or expressed and the ones that haven't, which is of course wider. So so in a way, like this can be thought of this sort of play space, like, well, sometimes I play from atomistic point of view because of what becomes fertile from that.
Yeah, as long as it's a style,
yeah,
you can operate with it, right? Yeah.
Yes.
And, yeah, this is also the same, or not the same, but very similar to the thing you were saying last week, Leo, about reverse engineering the world of an image or something like
that's
that.
absolutely related. Absolutely.
Yeah, like reading through its style, the consequences of its existence. It is also like a search, a navigation operation through style.
Yes, because like my principal interest, I think, with at least the direction in the play expanse that I'm trying to explore, or is principally this kind of what is the subjectivity that is doing the navigating? You know, that's the principal question I find myself I keep asking, because it's like, what games are we creating? But more importantly, what is the subjectivity that is creating the games, and how can we facilitate the navigation? Those games themselves create a subjectivity, right? And so if the worst person in the world is creating very seductive, highly addictive games that actually tear apart our image of like Leibniz, right? He was talking about like how, like the notion of real freedom, of real agency, is the ability to understand the cause effect relationship between things, and that we are inherently addicted animals that are addicted to stuff. But the principle of freedom is to understand the cause effect, to be able to choose what sad pleasures we get rid of. So it's like the problem is that the subjectivities we have take pleasure in things that are sad, and that are not necessarily we're not conscious of or choose to ideologically be distant from how we navigate. And without going on for too much longer, I think like the relationship that we have towards this abstract image of what it means to be a human being is a point of universality that I think we need to and that we hold in reference to. Like, what is our image of what it means to be a human being changes the course of what we do. And that can help us navigate, like as we try to understand what it really means to be human from a very diverse perspectives, and play with the notion of humanity, but at least it's not fixed.
Yeah, there is like if one puts in a way a card towards this, which is one could call, what is the game of subjectivity right now, question mark, like that contains this idea that okay, the subjectivity in itself forms a game which creates a navigating framework, the vessel, or processes subjectivity going forward. But the game were there because there can be other constructions, other organizations. And this is also like referring to the last session, why there was like kind of 4 like helpful dimensions. They are not ontological dimensions, but this was this flying, being above, hovering. Then there was the stilling, which is kind of the framing of the card, and then there was the diving. But then there was the 4th one, which is the meta, which is that you can always step outside. And I have some stuff on.
It's a time move. Pause is a time move. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a time move, but it is other things in a way. Like there's a can of worms, but there is a behavior of this meta, which is like the meta is not actually separate, but it's kind of like continuum. You can always step outside, but you can step outside of the outside. You can, but everything you can do in the meta, for example, it is a kind of a meta move to go at, oh, this is my game of subjectivity. I go meta and construct a new form of subjectivity and then step into it, like lower down from the meta, so to speak. And this is why the meta exists at any point, like at any.
But it exists virtually.
Yes.
Because just because you have the option doesn't mean you will exercise it. Yeah. And like there may even be unwritten ideological rules that like around our subjectivity where we won't take the option, because taking the option of reassessing the entirety of our subjectivity might be too terrifying and sublime of a moment, and like we don't want to do it, you know. So like, yeah, it's like just having the option is not enough.
Yeah, this is why the meta is a gradient. It's not like there's not like you don't step into a neutral meta. You actually kind of take distance, but you take distance in a way of creating separation. But you're still like into certain kind of dimension. Like it's not the neutral space that you're in when you're in meta. But yeah, that's a. But it's also why the kind of dimension perspective of the meta, the move of meta is important, because it expands the space in crucial fashion. But the one thing like here, like I think it's clear, especially from the beginning when we're really playing with the space, one could clearly see how it changed the discourse, and it also made the discourse to be able to, like, in a different level of construction. But then, like, if we imagine this, like, this being almost like we played a kind of a process space. But if one, I mean, of course, these documents remain, but in a kind of pragmatic sense, like thinking of this person stepping out as will step out of this, then coming to this, like the sense of saving, sense of archive, sense of retaining, really, is like one could take from here and put in a different form, which then one perhaps keeps to oneself, perhaps shares, and then the form of sharing, form of releasing, it becomes in itself affecting the saving itself. But that's another game. This is but I do think like the loop of that it's not the only game, but it's an interesting game of kind of putting attention on this. How is the process of play as we played here, but then how is the play of taking something that comes from here, like the many good cards, framings that and relations between them that has come from here, and then forming points of sharing from there.
I think what becomes evident when you say it like that is that saving a moment is creating a time. Creates a time that can be then put to used as a style to continue a moment in some way or another.
That's
it's
yeah.
the creation of a time.
Yes.
But it's also that we were talking about the ephemerality of style. Like, then there's the preservation of it, right? And then using jumping off points. So like when you have a thread, but it splits, you know, and maybe like one, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I've said this a couple of times, maybe even 3 times, but this example of like how colonial states kill oral tradition by recording it, right? Because the medium of oral tradition is memory, is not like a sound file or whatever. And then they're not being respectful of their time, the way in the style of the time, and you're actually diminishing the value of how it moves, how you navigate that time.
Yeah, I was about to say that doesn't style include some form of fossilization of time? Because you can find style only sort of afterwards, after you look into retrospective. I'm thinking about, of course, sort of arts movement or art style. Like you get that is a style after there has been some time, and then you have evaluated some sort of like, you know, it's you might grasp a style as it's developing, but there is some form of looking back and being like, oh, this is a style, like there is this style coming up. Like,
yeah, it's a consolidation.
A
no?
lot
There's
yes, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that is very much, and it's also like that's like seeing it as a style is already organizing it, like, and putting it into a form that can be continued or reproduced or used later, essentially. Like it's
Because the moment you say it's a style, the moment, because there's the style in itself, but the moment that you say it's a style, it becomes an icon. Right? And that's the thing. These icons can be used to navigate the n-dimensional space.
Yeah, and it becomes in this wider spectrum of, because I think one of these sort of potential liberating points is moving from the singularity and the objectivity of the symbol icon. Is like, this is what also the card provides, that it's already a network. Is like, I often think of, it's already a linchpin, like linchpin being this word of like something that gathers. Like, but the same thought, but with this opening of that it's already, like, you could even say that when you say it's a style, it's already a game.
Yeah.
That you have the kind of,
No, I'm not sure we can.
it's a start of a game, at least. Like you have like the notions of how to play it.
I don't know, because this is where I feel that like the distinction between icon and symbol is pretty important, because like the style, I wouldn't say is necessarily like, you have, I think like the game structures and all of that stuff, like the habits and like the processes, I think that's on the level of the symbols, right? And then the icon is really just like this sensible aesthetic thing whose sensible qualities reflect the network that they're embedded in. So like when somebody waves their hand, you know, like, yeah, but maybe you're right. Maybe you're right. Because insofar as the icon is impossible without the network that it's in, whose qualities it reflects, there's already pre-existing the game structure.
Yeah.
So maybe, yeah.
Yeah, and because style has already this sense of operating in a network, not just a network, but style of moving, operating,
yeah,
navigating.
That's for sure.
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, this totally also often cited example, but this is totally an explanation of video game genre and how a certain style becomes an icon, and just, you know, like roguelikes have the name of the icon a style emerges from. And then you have styles of games that you can recognize for very specific qualities, but some of them start to push that boundary, right? And that style is reconfigured.
Yeah, and they start to push it by kind of incorporating into them behavioral, like navigation in a network style. Like to be a roguelike, you have these patterns. You don't have like a strict list that you have to have these, but you take some like traits of behavior, structural qualities, and you put them in. And that makes you feel that you're in a roguelike, but then you might add new ones, and then it becomes a mutation of roguelike.
And if you mix it with the mechanics of a different genre that is also recognizable, then you get the crossing of two dimensions, two distinct dimensions, right? If you say, this is a roguelite, crossbreed, roguelite Metroidvania or whatever, they are two distinct, a crossbreed between two distinct styles.
Yeah. And that's like in a way like crossbreeding operations, like it's a whole kind of worms. Like somewhere I have a list of like I've been collecting like different kind of operational styles we could call that can happen in a crossbreed, which is a non-exhaustive list, but it's interesting what comes from there.
I'd love if we could host a session dedicated to styles.
Yes, like I think in a way like in this language it's almost like playing a seed card of styles. And once again, because they offer structural qualities, you could think of what other things we play to the space. Like not just use style as a thematic, but of course we can do that. We don't have to have anything else. But like was it the 3-1, which had styles and belonging, setting up a game board opens up the space of, okay, this is one approach. It's not saying that we'll have to utilize precisely this, but in this kind of space of thinking, the structurality of it is way more expressive. And what if it's a session on styles is actually setting up styles and maybe something else, and forming this sort of card-like space out of it? What do we want there becomes a much more expressive possibility.
Because it's like if we're looking at what is the nexus, what is the center of how we navigate the space, and like what we will end up doing, it's like, yes, a style as an icon is only understandable inside of because it represents the qualities of its network, but it is there where the new stuff comes from, you know, because that's the aesthetic encounter, you know. So can we play in that nexus, you know, and can we see where we go? That's the how can we navigate with style? How can we play with it? Can we play in that nexus, you know?
Yes, and it's also like style in that perspective. It's one can think of it metaphorically as a kind of a vessel. It has a way of navigation, like its own features as well. But then, like precisely, the game to style is also a kind of metaphoric connection, that there are similarities, but also, well, different emphasis in that. But then there are others, like
stylizing.
Yeah, and even something like a method, like so there's like that's one way of expanding the space of like looking at things that associate with styles I guess kind of this sort of vessel of navigation, but then also thinking what specializes the style from, say, a game or something else. So that's a possibility. But I do think, like, yeah, like if one kind of now, let's say, steps to the meta or takes an overview.
No, let's do it.
Yeah, like, so where have we been? Where are we now? I do think this question of like this perspective of play of saving, retaining from what was being played is maybe also an interesting pragmatic like possibility after the session. Like,
yeah, we had a brief, I think it was maybe 1 or 2 sessions where we tried to do a summary game.
Yeah.
Which was an effort in the saving styles direction.
But I think like one, like it's kind of like it contains saving, but it contains beyond that, because in a way, when you're doing this, and I would like to find a good word for this, but in a way, you don't have to respect anything that is here. Like you don't even have to save. It might be, oh,
yeah,
like this completely other thing is now created for me from the process in itself, and nothing kind of forces you to kind of be authentic or respectful in the manner of retaining.
yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and
that's liberating.
Yeah,
it's more liberating. Yeah,
yeah, and it then enters this sort of different picture of temporality and spatiality potentially, because then one can think of it as like one leaving an imprint. Like for example, if I write a move coming from here, for example, retaining 2 lines, like, or like a compilation of moves that creates an interesting approach to lines, like a move of like drawing a line sketchily, then another move which is like but don't have the word for it, but like almost turning it into a creature. Like I figure out a creature from a line. That's one way of navigating now from the line, which is then expanding on it. But it's also like potentially the sort of point of saving, not saving. And one thought on the lines coming from the third frame, third page, is like we didn't even talk about lines looping themselves, which is an idea that comes from what's present on the third page, like the rope, or for example, knots and loops.
Wow.
I think it's like, I think from here, like this is like starting to coagulate, like from the possibilities. It's kind of like a fuzzy picture, a generality of all possibilities. But then you start to see that certain practices start to kind of formulate a little bit more in a detailed and more precise manner. And they're not like this is the right way to do it, but it's more like in the way of not even best practices, but good practices. So that's a possibility that arises from here, and I think maybe that's a good direction to open from here, like towards the after session, post session.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah.
I got to admit, I've just been tripping out on drawing this this circle thing. I didn't really understand what happened.
No, it's okay. I'm creating like different reflections on closure, I guess.
Okay.
Like,
I'm lost in the play.
But
One thing I will do is I've been trying to watch this video explaining the different states of matter for like, I don't know, maybe a month, but I fall asleep every single time. And I haven't arrived to the part where the person explains time crystals, which is a state of matter, apparently. So I really want to know what's up with that.
No way.
Yeah, there's a
Wait,
state
what
of...
the fuck?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's insane. Yeah.
The funny thing is, on time crystals, it's like year old, maybe couple. I think,
New state of matter just dropped. And it's
No
time
way.
crystals. Yeah,
But
yeah.
but the funny thing is, like in the last few months, it's actually been discovered that it's not new, that actually some of the natural forms existing in nature have time crystal qualities.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
But I don't know what a time crystal is. So my saved state is look into that.
It
Dude,
doesn't.
I don't even care what it is in reality, dude. Time crystal, man. Like,
It sounds insane, really.
the name has too much potential to be bound to one concept.
Yeah, it sounds like it came out of a cheeky video game. Cannot believe it's a real thing.
It's
Or
essentially
it's the
time
substance of value.
time behaving as a loop, or
Mhm.
in a like so some of
Self-referential time.
materials actually have time behaviors within them that are forming loops, forming their own knots of time.
Is that actually what it is?
Say again?
Is that actually what it is, or are you
In a very rough sense, like there's more to
Wow,
it.
that is insane.
Yeah.
Dude, hey, sounds like capital to me, if I'm being
Yes.
honest.
Let's farm some of those time crystals.
Yes.
Yeah, find a time crystal.
But human signs are, in a way, time crystals of themselves. In them, like they have a time crystal. Like they're not purely that, but they form this sort of way of looping, wanting to resist the kind of flow of time, which is in they're metaphorically time crystals. But I think like from this, like I think there are these directions for me, like there's sort of questions of like seeing almost, yes, maybe first like ways of playing, but then ultimately like almost like cultural practices that don't exist, like suddenly conversation can be expanded with these kind of structures. And what could that be in terms of culture? That's a horizon. I think it's a very interesting horizon in like, could our processes expand from that? I would say yes, that's a long pathway to travel, but I would say yes. But then the different ways of getting it there is an interesting direction. But I think it can already form something of a direction towards releasing proposal.
Yeah, I really like it. I wish we could, from a pragmatic perspective, and maybe we can spend some time on this in a session. I want to bring something to start with, but the creation of this Oxel markup language and sort of like a data structure for the cards.
Yes.
Something that is really nimble and easy to maintain and easy to create. So I would like our conversation on styles and saved and time crystals to be part of that.
Yes.
Yeah, data structure.
And it also forms like a one larger medium on this challenge of releasing, like how, like there is no true way, but it's interesting to create a pragmatically flexible way, but it still doesn't exhaust. Like somebody can find maybe in a different medium, whether it's Twitter or Wikipedia or whatever, a different way of expressing a card-like thing.
Yeah, there's so yeah, some of the other agency people I want to join the XORG calls. So they're I think they will
Sure.
show up sometime. But Yeah, they've been working on like sketching up some interfaces too, and so one of the interesting things is we were talking about like abstraction, right? Of the different ways that you can view. So imagine there was like the first person point of view, you know, on like you are on a boat or something, and you can see you can navigate the space from like a first person card perspective. And then you could see the constellation, right? So you've got like that level as well. It would be nice to have a toggle on the side or something of like there's like the frame of the interface for within which there can be many interfaces, but at least this meta frame allows you to see the concrete with the abstract at the same time. So like if you are like in the first person, maybe I would see the constellations faded but over my existing image, so that while I'm moving I can still see the structure like behind the matrix in which I'm in, you know, at the time. Or I could fade away from concrete and deal only with the abstractions, you know. But that way, just thinking about this layered component and how I think there's the need for a meta frame, just so that like just as one additional thing that can help you not become a pipe rat.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that
Sounds
is
great.
something like there are some interesting game structures that actually play with that structuring area without actually like maybe realizing or putting it in such words, but being kind of radical in this. Like
I would love to see some interfaces, because we're mocking some stuff up, you know. I mean,
Oh, you just have to look at video games. Like
just in
that's,
general.
I mean, in terms of like, you're talking about the pause menu as a meta frame, for example, you know, where rules are renegotiated. That's totally a space of a meta space, still within the game, but acting in a meta quality. Pause menus, inventory menus. I think those
character's
are
point of
great
view.
source. Yeah, points of view in video games.
Very
Those
true.
great perspectives.
Totally facts, actually. That's totally facts.
Of course, they kind of
mechanics.
Yeah.
The most flexible play, and well, that's partly flexible because it doesn't have to always deal with the interface, although it's actually an interesting question towards that. But the most flexible way being like, of course, role-playing games, which is they deal with space as a semiotic space. Like, of course, every character forms a point of view, but then somebody can start to talk from the point of view of the weather, or, you know, a rat comes out from the floorboards and it becomes a perspective in itself. Like there is this sort of dynamic possibility to generate or bring in perspectives. And like that, of course, not everything needs that freedom, but it's interesting that that quality is definitely there. It's just not never really thought of in that manner.
That's something that's something else we're trying to put. I mean, you guys know already, of the inside of the meta interface is like this perspective filter, where you could see the graph as it, or like the structure, right? Different perceptions on the structure, filter between them, you know. You can get the perceptions, like, right, of what you're talking about, of the rat, right, of hypothetical entities, of certain points of view. But I think the perspective filter is also one of these meta.
Yeah.
On the meta interface.
Yeah, there is like there was even a session, I don't remember the title, but there was this term perspectivism, which is kind of like monad like approach generalized. It's like everything actually defines as a perspective, and like whenever you have something to grasp, you're working with the perspective, and then you can look at the possibilities of configuring or calibrating other perspectives, and that's an
it's just like a recognition and operations on style.
Yeah, yeah. Like these are like different like ways of looking at this. Of course, you could say style is a different perspective towards the same area versus perspective itself, which is true. Like, but then they could become.
But the way that you approach the question is also a style.
Yes, it is a style, but it's also a perspective. But then you choose the vehicle, the vessel that you travel with, whether it's a style or a perspective, precisely in terms of how do you want to process it. But because the processes are different with different calibrations, or from say style, from perspective, or something else. But with that, in terms of closure, I think like finding this things that one wants to save, retain, still looking for a word, kind of reformulate. From here, what was presented, I mean, the link will stay open. I can try to put the link on the, share the link in other ways. And that might be a good kind of post-play play. And of course, that doesn't have to come from what is physically or represented representation-wise here. It can come from any of the play, whether marked down or not, or like as an open question. Like I think it's a good direction. I will at least promise to reflect on that and process that, because I do think, like, in terms of play, there is this loop which I kind of mentioned earlier, which is like if you have a play that opens towards a process, but then you have a play that is a way to filter from the process, and then towards expressing it, sharing it, which then whatever is shared becomes a new seed of play, and therefore you have a loop.
That's very, yes. Very very yes.
And that's a point of reflection. And maybe on that, does anybody have points of closure? Any thoughts left to share?
I really like the affirmative. That's very, very yes.
Yes,
that's great.
We shall underline that. And Linda, hopefully it's been interesting. I know you were probably limited in your participation, but hopefully
it was lots of just lots of things to think about. Yes, and also the future of our cards, the future of our website. I feel like there was lots of inputs that I need to process. So thank you, guys.
Thank you for being with us.
Yes.
Hello. Hi there.
It's also like I like, for me, the background is like seeing this sort of potential culture, like forms of culture that are not yet there. Like, for example, what happens when people sit down to have a conversation, and it's not that one has to force us that's every conversation. That's not where one gets. One cannot teleport there, but one can travel towards that by having such forms which can then potentially branch out, expand, mutate. That's a way of traveling towards that distance that for me is interesting. And I think like there is potential there, like especially reflecting the beginnings of the play, and when we're adding these things, how much it changed and created this sort of certain kind of different space of process, and flexibility of the space of process. and how the expressions behaved. That is highly interesting, among other things.
Beautiful, beautiful, guys.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm looking forward to everything that is gonna be popping. I'm gonna try to post this navigation style thing on a Git book or something. If we
Ooh,
can
nice.
collaborate on it.
Yeah, that would be good.
I think it's a better format than Google Docs. If you guys are in, I think we're already aligned or whatever. So if we're serious about taking that kind of direction, yeah, I'm gonna try to set up a Git book for us to collaborate.
Good. Yeah, that's and like I said, every medium is a challenge in a positive sense, and like it opens up its own directions. Gitbook opens up different directions than others.
Yeah, but Google Docs is like daunting, and like
yeah.
I know when I invite people to help me out on like the realization paper, it's
That
like
paper is insane.
Have you started reading it?
Yeah, I did, not on the most sober circumstances, and I had a difficult time.
Dude, check out the shared situational awareness section, or the part on the museums and grounding, like our social forms.
I will definitely do it.
Yeah, I'd say the main thing with that paper, at least, is just like, if we are to have such an explosion of possible cultures and ways of playing, just how can we maintain shared situational awareness while we are exploring the expanse, So I think that paper is pretty much entirely dedicated to what does a catastrophe like prevention or risk assessment mechanism look like in an explosive environment.
Yeah, it's a useful perspective, like in a way, like what is kind of explored from the card as like different kind of grammatizations and then calibrations on that grammatization of how to open up the space in the first place, or yeah, like in what kind of ways there are, and beyond the conventional ways of it. But then of course that opens up the question is like how to synchronize, how to not get lost in the space.
Yeah, that is exactly the point. Yeah, one of the things that's pretty interesting about it is like anything is a proposition, So it's like, yeah, it's taking this whole propositional logic kind of approach or whatever, but everything is a proposition, an offer to play,
Yes, this is why the offer is called expression.
Yeah,
because like it's even like that it's meant literally in that there is like every and also like this was somewhere in the earlier parts, is like every expression also behaves in a rule-like manner in the widest sense of rule, because it kind of contains the idea of interpret this meaning, which is in itself a rule-like construct. It's like whatever you express creates a rule-like behavior, which has very interesting connotations towards this.
Yeah.
So that's what we called like op or operations at one point. Like, but yeah, it's one reflection point here.
Mm-hmm.
But shall we stop the recording? Yes, I guess so.
Sure thing. Yeah.
Goodbye, potential people. With this fragment of a closure, threads running over, and the thread stop here.